What if the religions you thought you knew are just the surface of a much deeper, forgotten world of gods, rituals, and empires long gone? In this journey, we'll trace the origins of 100 belief systems, from ancient river cults and sky gods to modern spiritual movements that reshape what faith even means. And in the final chapter, you'll uncover the haunting truth about the lost religions that once ruled entire civilizations, then vanished almost without a trace. Now, prepare to explore rituals, legends, and hidden beliefs from every corner of civilization. Chapter 1: Ancient Roots and the Abrahamic Traditions. Long before cities rose or languages were written down, people looked toward the heavens and wondered. They listened to the wind rustling through trees, watched the stars move in silent patterns, and felt the warmth of the sun on their skin. In these early, hushed moments of human consciousness, the seeds of religion began to grow. The desire to understand, to find meaning, to speak to something greater than themselves. It was there in the beginning before history even had a name. And from that quiet soil, one of the most enduring branches of belief would eventually rise. A family of religions that would span continents, move empires, and touch billions of lives. This was the world of the Abrahamic faiths. And their story begins not with noise or power, but with a quiet, wandering people looking for a home. In the ancient lands of the Near East, in a time before maps, there lived tribes who traveled with the seasons, guided by herds and by hope. One among them, known only through fragments of memory passed down across generations, would become the symbolic root of 3 world religions. His name was Abraham, though details of his life are tangled in myth and mystery. His journey marks the spiritual beginning for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Judaism emerged first, formed over centuries as the Hebrew people made their way through deserts, through exile, and through survival. Their faith grew from a covenant, a sacred understanding between their ancestors and the divine. Unlike the many gods of neighboring tribes and kingdoms, the Hebrew God was one, singular, invisible, not tied to rivers or mountains or statues, but to words, laws, and promises. In ancient scrolls and oral tales, they preserved the stories of how they came to be. Stories of parting seas and burning bushes, of kings and prophets, of loss and return. These stories weren't just entertainment. They were identity. They were survival. For centuries, Jewish communities kept their beliefs alive, even when scattered from their homelands, even when faced with pressures to forget or to change. Their faith was built to last, not in buildings or temples, but in memory and community. But from the soil of Judaism, another tree would grow. Centuries after the rise of the Jewish kingdoms, a teacher was born in a small town under Roman rule. His followers believed him to be the promised one, a fulfillment of ancient words, a bridge between earth and heaven. His life, brief and filled with both compassion and conflict, would become the center of a new faith, Christianity. What began as a small circle of students and stories spread across cities and seas. Slowly at first, then with a force that would reshape the known world. The message was one of love and salvation, of sacrifice and resurrection. But it also promised something rare and powerful, hope for everyone. Not just the chosen or the wealthy or the wise, for all. This idea, soft yet revolutionary, found fertile ground in a Roman world weary of violence and inequality. In time, emperors bowed to it, cathedrals rose, and what was once a fringe movement of fishermen and laborers became a global faith, divided into countless traditions: Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, and many others. Each held to the same root, but each grew in different directions, shaped by culture, geography, and the long shadows of history. But the story didn't end there. 600 years after the Christian message began its journey, another voice rose from the deserts of Arabia. He was a merchant, a husband, a man of thought and quiet strength. In a time when tribes worshipped many gods and power ruled by sword alone, he brought a new message. One God, a return to the path, a reminder of mercy, justice, and devotion. His name was Muhammad, and the faith that would follow him, Islam, would grow faster than any before. The words he spoke, believed to be divine revelations, were memorized and written down in a book called the Quran. It was a guide not just for prayer, but for life: how to treat others, how to build a just society, how to live in harmony with the divine. And like the two Abrahamic faiths before it, Islam carried forward the torch of monotheism, connecting itself to the earlier prophets and stories. Islam spread rapidly, not just through conquest, but through trade, education, and inspiration. Mosques became centers of learning. Cities became beacons of culture. And from Spain to Indonesia, the call to prayer echoed across landscapes and languages. Today, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam together claim the hearts of more than half the world's population. And yet, their beginnings were humble, shared, tied together by that single thread stretching back to Abraham, back to the deserts and the stars. But the story of Abrahamic faiths doesn't end with those three names. Scattered among the corners of the Middle East and beyond are smaller, lesser-known religions that also trace their roots to this ancient source. In the rugged hills and quiet villages of northern Iraq, a people known as the Yazidis still hold to their ancient beliefs. Their faith blends elements of old Mesopotamian practices with echoes of Abrahamic themes. They honor a figure known as the peacock angel, and while misunderstood and often persecuted, their traditions stretch back centuries, perhaps even millennia. They are a reminder that religion doesn't always move in straight lines. Sometimes it loops, twists, and holds on in places history almost forgets. Nearby, the Druze people live quietly, mostly in Lebanon and Syria. Their religion began as an offshoot of Islam over 1,000 years ago, but it quickly became something unique. Esoteric, philosophical, and closed to outsiders, Druze beliefs are passed only within the community. They speak of unity and the soul's journey, of the divine presence in all things. In many ways, theirs is a religion of mystery, resilient, private, and enduring. Another ancient light flickers in the form of Zoroastrianism. Born in Persia long before Islam, before even the Greek gods reigned supreme, this faith taught that the universe was a battle between good and evil. Ahura Mazda, the god of light and wisdom, stood at the center of it all. Followers were urged to choose truth, to care for fire and water, and to live with integrity. Zoroastrianism may not be widely practiced today, but its influence runs deep. Some scholars believe it shaped early Jewish, Christian, and Islamic ideas about heaven, hell, angels, and the final judgment. In Iran and among scattered communities across the world, a small number still hold to this ancient faith. They guard the sacred flames, whisper the old prayers, and remember the time when their beliefs were the foundation of an empire. Still others emerged more recently, carrying the Abrahamic spirit into new times. The Bahá'í Faith began in 19th century Persia, with the message that all religions come from the same source, that every great teacher, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and others, was a messenger of one eternal truth: unity, peace, the oneness of humanity. Baha'is believe that humanity is one family, that racial and national divisions are illusions, and that a better world is not just possible but inevitable. Though persecuted in its birthplace, the Bahá'í Faith has quietly spread across the globe. Followers gather in humble meetings, building temples shaped like lotuses, circles, or light itself. Their message, like a whisper in a storm, continues to call for love without borders. Elsewhere, in the riverside towns of southern Iraq and southwestern Iran, live the Mandeans. Their religion, old and secretive, holds baptism as its central rite. Not once, but many times throughout life. They revere John the Baptist and speak a language that may be the closest living relative to ancient Aramaic. In a world that often moves too fast to remember, they keep the water flowing, both symbolically and spiritually. Even the Samaritans mentioned in ancient texts and parables still exist, though only in a few hundred people. Living between modern-day Israel and the West Bank, they preserve their own version of the Torah, worship on their sacred mountain, and maintain rituals unchanged for centuries. They are a living bridge to the world before temples fell and kings were crowned. And among Turkish and Kurdish communities, Elvis practice a faith that blends Islamic ideas with ancient Anatolian mysticism, Sufi poetry, and a strong sense of social justice. They hold communal ceremonies filled with music and movement, seeking unity with the divine not through dogma, but through love and inner truth. Together, these lesser-known paths form the quieter notes in the Abrahamic symphony. They remind us that history isn't just the story of the powerful, but also of the persistent, of those who remember, of those who carry the flame through storms. When we speak of the Abrahamic traditions, we often think of borders, of divisions, of conflict. But underneath, there is a shared melody, a belief in one God, a reverence for justice, a longing for peace. Each of these religions, large or small, loud or soft, has tried to answer the same questions. Why are we here? What does it mean to live well? What comes after this life? They do not always agree, but in their searching, in their striving, they become companions on a long human journey, a journey that began in silence, with stars above, with desert wind, with a whisper in the soul that said, "There must be more than this." And so the story of faith began. But before we continue, let me know if you're enjoying this kind of long, gentle history. Feel free to tap that like button and subscribe, only if you truly love what I'm doing here. And in the comments, share where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your city. I always love seeing our little bedtime crew gathering from every corner of the world. Now, lower your lights. Maybe let a soft fan hum in the background and settle in. Let's proceed into tonight's quiet journey together. Chapter 2: Branches of Christianity. The story of Christianity did not remain a single thread. Over the centuries, it branched and braided into many paths, each carrying forward the message of faith in ways shaped by language, empire, reform, and renewal. What began as a humble movement in the eastern provinces of the Roman world soon grew into a tree with many limbs, spreading across the earth, each with its own rhythm and ritual, but all reaching for the same light. The first and largest of these branches is Roman Catholicism. It is both ancient and enduring. After the fall of Jerusalem, Christianity found a new home in Rome. There, amidst marble columns and imperial roads, the Bishop of Rome slowly gained prominence. Over time, this bishop became known as the Pope, and his role grew to be both spiritual and political. The Roman Catholic Church became a bridge between heaven and earth, promising salvation, guiding kings, crowning emperors, and shaping the laws of lands. Cathedrals rose across Europe, filled with stained glass, incense, and echoing hymns. Monks and nuns retreated into silence, copying sacred texts by hand, preserving knowledge during dark centuries. And even as wars raged and empires fell, the Catholic Church held firm, its influence woven into every part of Western history. But while Rome flourished in the West, a different heart of Christianity beat in the East. Eastern Orthodoxy grew out of the ancient cities of Byzantium, places like Constantinople, Antioch, and Alexandria. Its roots were shared with Rome, but its soul became distinct. Where the West looked toward law and structure, the East sought mystery and vision. In Orthodox churches, domes rose like the heavens themselves, filled with golden icons and the scent of oil lamps. Worship became a journey through time, echoing with chants and ritual movements that hadn't changed in centuries. The Orthodox tradition holds tightly to the teachings of the early councils and the unity of Scripture with ancient interpretation. When Rome and Constantinople split in the Great Schism of 1054, it was more than a disagreement. It was a slow and solemn parting of ways. Yet both sides continued to honor the same core truths, each in their own rhythm, their own language, their own way. Then, in the 16th century, the calm surface of Christian unity was disturbed by something powerful, a cry for reform. This was the dawn of Protestantism, sparked in part by deep frustration with corruption, indulgences, and spiritual emptiness. Voices began to rise calling for a return to Scripture, a renewal of faith, a cleansing of excess. One voice in particular would change the world. His ideas, printed and carried across Europe by the new power of the printing press, ignited a fire that could not be extinguished. Protestantism did not become one church, but a movement of many. It prized direct access to the Bible, personal faith, and the belief that salvation came not through rituals or institutions, but through grace alone. As Protestantism spread, it fractured into countless expressions, each a reflection of a people's longing to know the divine in their own language, in their own way. One of those expressions took shape in England. Here, faith and monarchy were deeply entangled. When the king sought both power and independence, he broke away from Rome and established a national church. Thus, Anglicanism was born. It was not quite Catholic and not quite Protestant, but something in between. Its churches retained the beauty of ritual and the solemnity of liturgy, but its theology bent toward reform. The Book of Common Prayer became its guide, and in its verses, the people found both comfort and clarity. Anglicanism spread with the British Empire, planting its traditions from India to the Americas. It remains a broad and varied family, some parts leaning toward tradition, others toward renewal, all rooted in the middle path. Meanwhile, further north in Germany, a more precise and scholarly tradition took hold. Lutheranism, born from the teachings of the Reformer whose actions had set the Protestant world in motion, emphasized a faith anchored in Scripture and grace. Lutherans cherished the sacraments, upheld ancient hymns, and kept a liturgical structure that still echoed the old Catholic Massachusetts. Yet they were firm in their break from papal authority. They taught that salvation was not earned, but received. Their churches became havens of music, education, and serious thought. Generations of thinkers and composers, including some of history's most beloved names, drew from Lutheran wells to shape both belief and beauty. In the valleys of Switzerland and the lowlands of France and Holland, another vision of reform stirred. This was Calvinism, or what would later be known as the Reformed tradition. Here, the focus turned to the sovereignty of God, the discipline of the Church, and the structure of society itself. Calvinists believed that every part of life, work, law, family, could be lived for the glory of God. They formed tight-knit communities governed by elders, with sermons that delved deep into Scripture. Their simplicity in worship was matched by a fierce sense of purpose. In time, this tradition would give rise to movements in Scotland, the Netherlands, and colonial America. Its legacy lived on in ethics, democracy, and a profound sense of calling. But the reform was far from over. In the 18th century, in the Green Hills of England, a group of students at Oxford began gathering for prayer, study, and service. They sought not just correct belief, but a living faith. From these humble gatherings, Methodism emerged. Its founder traveled by horseback, preaching in fields and streets, calling people to renewal of heart and mind. Methodism emphasized personal holiness, community care, and the idea that salvation was open to all. It was a religion of songs, of circuits, of small groups who met each week to ask, "How is it with your soul?" In time, Methodism became one of the most widespread Protestant movements in the world, building schools, hospitals, and missions wherever it went. Around the same period, another group looked even further back. They were known as the Anabaptists, though many did not use the name for themselves. They rejected infant baptism, believing that faith must be a conscious, adult choice. They also rejected violence, hierarchy, and entanglement with state power. For these beliefs, they were persecuted across Europe. Many fled to the New World, where they formed quiet farming communities that prized simplicity, humility, and nonviolence. From them came the Mennonites, the Amish, and the Hutterites. Their lives were not loud or political, but their witness was clear. Live simply, work hard, love peace. As the centuries passed and the New World became a place of innovation and renewal, another current of faith began to rise. Evangelicalism. It was not a denomination but a movement, a way of being Christian that emphasized personal conversion, the authority of Scripture, and a sense of mission. Evangelicals believed that faith should be alive, active, and outward-looking. Their revivals drew thousands. Their preachers spoke with fire. They built universities and radio networks, launched charities and campaigns. In America and beyond, evangelicalism became one of the most influential forces in modern Christianity, both admired and debated, but never ignored. And then, in the 20th century, something happened that surprised even the churches themselves. In a small gathering in California, believers prayed for a deeper experience of the Holy Spirit. What followed was powerful. People spoke in tongues. They felt a rush of divine presence. This was the beginning of Pentecostalism. It spread like wildfire, especially in the global South, among the poor, the marginalized, the overlooked. Pentecostalism was emotional, experiential, and deeply personal. It taught that the gifts of the Spirit, healing, prophecy, speaking in tongues, were not just ancient stories, but living realities. Its worship was full of music, dance, and passionate prayer. Today, Pentecostalism is among the fastest-growing movements in the Christian world, a sign that faith continues to move in unexpected and powerful ways. These 10 branches, though different in history and practice, share a common ancestry. They all trace their roots to a single teacher in Galilee, to a message of hope and transformation that began with fishermen and wanderers. Over time, that message grew, adapted, and responded to the world around it. Through empire and reformation, through silence and revival, Christianity became a forest of voices, each one singing its part in a vast and sacred song. Some branches grew tall and wide, others stayed close to the ground. Some reached across oceans, others stayed nestled in valleys and villages. But all were part of the same tree. All sought, in their own way, to follow a path that began 2,000 years ago with the quiet call to love, to forgive, and to believe. And so the story continues. Chapter 3: The Islamic World. The desert was quiet. The winds moved softly across the sand, sweeping across the dunes like a whisper from the past. Beneath the burning sky, people gathered in the shade of palm trees, beside oases, in the corners of trade routes that stitched together the ancient world. It was in this land, dry and wild, that a voice rose with words that would shape history, a voice that called for unity, for submission to the will of the divine, for a way of life that reached beyond tribes, beyond power, beyond the noise of the world. This was the beginning of Islam, and from its origins in the 7th century, Islam spread with breathtaking speed. Carried by caravans and caliphs, by scholars and mystics, it stretched from the shores of the Atlantic to the islands of Southeast Asia. Along the way, it transformed. It adapted to new languages, cultures, and questions. And from its roots, many branches grew, each with its own path, its own story, its own vision of what it means to live in surrender to the will of God. The largest of these branches is known simply as Sunni Islam. Sunni Islam traces its understanding of leadership back to the companions of the Prophet, to those who stood by him, learned from him, and carried his message after his death. Sunnis believe that the community chose its leaders rightly, beginning with Abu Bakr, then Umar, Uthman, and Ali. Over time, schools of thought emerged to help Muslims interpret the teachings left behind. These schools, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali, each offered slightly different approaches to law and practice, but all remained part of the same broader community. Sunni Islam values consensus, tradition, and the unity of the Ummah, the global Muslim community. It is the largest denomination in Islam, followed by the majority of Muslims across the world, from Indonesia to Egypt, from Morocco to Pakistan. But not everyone agreed on the course of succession after the Prophet's death. From a different interpretation of those early events came the rise of Shia Islam. Shia Muslims believe that leadership should have remained within the Prophet's family, beginning with his cousin and son-in-law, Ali. They hold that divine guidance continued through a line of imams, leaders not just in politics but in spiritual authority. Over time, the Shia community developed rich traditions of theology, mourning, and resistance. The martyrdom of Imam Hussein at Karbala became a symbol of sacrifice and injustice. Shia Islam often centers around themes of struggle and loyalty, and its rituals reflect a deep emotional connection to its history. While Iran and Iraq have large Shia populations, communities can be found across the world, holding fast to a faith that remembers, weeps, and hopes. Further to the south, along the coasts of Oman and parts of East Africa, another stream flows quietly. Bahá'í Islam is one of the oldest surviving sects, tracing its roots to early debates about leadership and justice. The Bahá'ís split from both Sunni and Shia lines in the earliest centuries of Islam. They believe that leadership should be based on piety and wisdom, not on lineage or popular acclaim. Their approach to law and theology is moderate and practical, often focused more on deeds than words. In Oman, Bahá'í traditions have shaped a culture of tolerance and dialogue. Though they make up a small portion of the global Muslim population, their presence is deeply woven into the fabric of their communities. Quiet, steady, and thoughtful, Bahá'í Islam remains one of the most distinct and least understood traditions in the Islamic world. And then there are those who do not look outward for guidance, but inward. Sufism is not a separate sect but a spiritual path that has taken root across many Islamic traditions. It is the mystic's path, the lover's path. Sufis seek direct experience of the divine through prayer, poetry, music, and silence. They follow spiritual teachers known as sheikhs or pirs, who guide disciples through stages of purification and awakening. In gardens and shrines, under stars and within stone domes, they gather to chant, to whirl, to lose themselves in remembrance. Sufism has produced some of Islam's greatest poets, scholars, and saints. Though sometimes viewed with suspicion by more legalistic schools, its influence is undeniable. For the Sufi, the journey is not just toward paradise, but into the heart, where the divine is waiting. But the Islamic world does not stop with the old lines of mysticism and tradition. In the late 19th century, a new movement began in India, one that would challenge established ideas while holding firmly to the core message of Islam. Ahmadiyya Islam was founded by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, who claimed to be the promised reformer and messianic figure awaited by many Muslims. Ahmadis believe that Islam is a living faith, one that evolves and renews itself in each age. They reject violence, promote peace, and emphasize the unity of all religions under one God. They have built schools, hospitals, and mosques in countries around the world. But their beliefs have made them controversial. In some Muslim-majority countries, they face persecution and legal exclusion. Yet despite this, the Ahmadiyya community continues to grow, driven by a message of love for all, hatred for none. In the heart of the 20th century, across the ocean in a land far from Mecca, another Islamic voice began to rise. The Nation of Islam emerged in the United States during a time of deep racial injustice and cultural upheaval. It combined Islamic teachings with a message of black empowerment, self-reliance, and spiritual awakening. Under leaders like Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X, it offered dignity and purpose to those long denied both. Though its theology differs from mainstream Islam, especially in its early teachings, it opened the door for many African Americans to embrace Islam more broadly. In time, many members transitioned into traditional Sunni practice, while others remained within the nation's evolving framework. It stands as a uniquely American expression of Islam, shaped by the pain and promise of its own soil. Meanwhile, in the mountains of Syria and the shadows of history, a secretive tradition continues quietly. The Alawites are a small sect with beliefs that blend elements of Shia Islam with older traditions. They hold Ali in special reverence, see spiritual truth in cycles of time, and practice rituals known only to their own. Historically persecuted and misunderstood, they often lived in isolated communities. In modern times, their presence has grown more visible, especially in Syria where they have held political power. Yet their faith remains largely closed to outsiders, passed down through initiation and guarded by silence. For the Alawite, religion is not performance. It is secrecy, heritage, and inner light. In another branch of Shia Islam, a lineage of imams continued through a different path. Ismailism split from other Shia communities over the succession after the sixth imam. Followers of this tradition believe that the divine light continues through the line of the Aga Khans, who serve as both spiritual and temporal leaders. Ismailis emphasize intellectual engagement, charity, and ethical living. Their institutions promote education, cultural preservation, and global development. In times of persecution, they have adapted, often thriving in diaspora. From East Africa to Canada, Ismailis are known for their civic contributions and quiet strength. Their mosques, often called Jamikhanas, reflect their inclusive spirit and commitment to progress. They are a reminder that faith can evolve with grace. Further southeast, in the lands of Pakistan and Balochistan, a lesser-known tradition continues its simple practice. Zikri Islam developed as a reformist movement with a central focus on the remembrance of God. The word zikr means remembrance, and for the Zikris, this takes the form of devotional gatherings where God's name is repeated in rhythm and harmony. They emphasize community, discipline, and spiritual focus. Though they share many elements with Sunni practice, their unique rituals and theological differences have sometimes led to marginalization. Yet they endure, bound by the power of remembrance and the quiet strength of unity. And finally, there are those who seek to return to the pure message of the Quran alone. Quranism is a modern movement that rejects the authority of hadith, sayings and traditions attributed to the Prophet, believing that the Quran alone is sufficient as a guide. Quranists argue that much of Islamic law and practice has drifted away from the original intent of the divine revelation. They advocate for a simpler, more rational Islam, one that speaks to the individual conscience and avoids centuries of human interpretation. While their numbers remain small, their presence is growing, especially in online spaces and academic circles. For them, the essence of Islam lies not in ritual, but in the words written in the book, waiting to be read with fresh eyes. Together, these 10 expressions of Islam form a vast and varied tapestry. Some are old, their roots buried deep in the soil of ancient debates. Others are new, born from the pressures and promises of modern life. Some are global, reaching millions. Others are local, barely known beyond a single region. But all are bound by the same central idea: the oneness of God, and the call to live in awareness of that truth. Islam, like the desert it came from, is both harsh and beautiful. It is shaped by wind and time, by struggle and devotion. Its traditions are not fixed, but flowing. Its communities are not uniform, but diverse. Yet in the morning call to prayer, in the quiet turning of the pages of the Quran, in the whispered greetings of peace, there is a thread that binds them all. The Islamic world is not a single voice, but a chorus. Each voice carries its own rhythm, its own echo. Some chant, some debate, some remain silent, but together they form a history that continues to unfold. A faith that continues to move, a path that continues to call, and so the journey of belief goes on. Chapter 4: Dharmic Traditions of South Asia. Long before the first kings carved palaces into stone, long before ships crossed oceans or cathedrals rose into the sky, people gathered along the rivers of South Asia and looked inward. They sat beneath trees. They listened to the rhythm of breath. They watched the stars but also studied the self. The world around them pulsed with life. Gods in the wind, ancestors in the fire, meaning hidden in every grain of rice and every drop of rain. It was here on the Indian subcontinent that the Dharmic religions emerged. These traditions did not begin with battles or revelations, but with questions. What is right? What happens after death? How does one live well in a world of change, desire, and suffering? The answers they found would form some of the most enduring spiritual systems in human history. Systems built not on belief alone, but on practice, on ethics, on lifetimes of reflection. At the heart of this spiritual landscape stands Hinduism, India's oldest living religion and one of the most complex. To call Hinduism a single religion is like calling the ocean a single wave. It is many rivers flowing together, a vast collection of texts, rituals, stories, and philosophies, braided together by time. Some see it as polytheistic, honoring countless gods and goddesses. Others see it as monotheistic, worshipping one divine presence expressed in many forms. Still others see it as pantheistic or non-dual, where all of reality is divine. Hinduism embraces the rhythms of the cosmos. It speaks of dharma, the duty one carries in life, of karma, the law of cause and effect, of samsara, the cycle of rebirth, and of moksha, the liberation from that cycle. Sacred texts like the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita offer layers of teaching, some poetic, some philosophical, all inviting reflection. Across India and beyond, people rise with the sun to offer prayers. They light lamps, chant mantras, and make offerings to their chosen deity. And through this daily devotion, the abstract becomes personal. The eternal becomes immediate. From this vast tradition, several distinct paths have emerged, each focusing on a particular face of the divine. Vaishnavism is one of the largest of these. It centers on Vishnu, the protector, the preserver of the universe. He is often worshipped through his avatars, divine incarnations who descend to restore balance. Among them, Rama and Krishna stand as two of the most beloved figures in Hinduism. Rama, the noble prince who upholds duty above all, and Krishna, the playful god who teaches through love and wisdom. Vaishnava temples are filled with color, music, and joy. Stories of Vishnu's incarnations are sung in every language, passed from grandparents to children in the quiet glow of evening lamps. Shaivism walks a different path. It honors Shiva, the destroyer and transformer. But Shiva is not destruction for its own sake. He is the force that clears away illusion, that makes space for renewal. Often depicted in deep meditation or dancing within a ring of fire, Shiva embodies both stillness and motion. Shaivite yogis seek his essence in silence, in the breath, in the burning of ego. Their temples, often carved into mountains or tucked beside rivers, are places of intensity and austerity. Pilgrims journey barefoot to mountaintops to glimpse the icy peaks where Shiva is believed to dwell. For Shaivites, divinity is raw, untamed, and deeply personal. Shaktism reveals yet another face of Hindu devotion, one centered on the goddess. Here, the divine is not male or distant, but feminine and near. Shakti is the energy that moves all things, the mother of the universe, the source from which all creation springs. She appears as Durga, riding a lion into battle, as Kali, fierce and protective, as Lakshmi, bestowing abundance, as Sarasvati, granting wisdom and song. Shakti temples pulse with drums and incense. Devotees chant her names, offer flowers, and see in her not just protection, but identity. In Shaktism, the world is not something to escape, but something to honor, to celebrate, to revere. These traditions, Vaishnavism, Shaivism, and Shaktism, are not rigidly separate. In many homes, all are honored side by side. For in Hinduism, the divine wears many faces, but speaks with one heart. As Hindu traditions matured, new questions emerged. What if the goal is not devotion, but awakening? What if liberation is not won through gods, but through insight? From such questions, over 2,500 years ago, a prince walked away from his palace and became the Buddha. His teachings would birth a new tradition, Buddhism. Buddhism begins not with belief, but with observation. Life contains suffering. That suffering arises from craving. There is a way to end it, and there is a path that leads to that end. These are the Four Noble Truths, the foundation of all Buddhist teachings. The path that follows is called the Eightfold Path, a guide to living ethically, thinking clearly, and meditating deeply. Buddhism is non-theistic. It does not require belief in a god. Instead, it invites direct experience. It teaches that each person has the potential to awaken, to see reality as it truly is, to escape the cycle of rebirth and reach nirvana, a state beyond suffering. Over time, Buddhism split into several major branches, each reflecting the cultures it touched. Theravada Buddhism is the oldest surviving school. It is sometimes called the Way of the Elders, practiced in Sri Lanka, Thailand, Myanmar, and Laos. It emphasizes the original teachings of the Buddha. Theravada monks live simple lives, often supported by lay communities. They study the Pali Canon, meditate for hours, and teach the Dharma through action as much as words. In its temples, one can feel the weight of centuries, the stillness, the discipline, the deep well of ancient insight. Mahayana Buddhism arose a few hundred years later. Its name means the great vehicle, and it opened the path to enlightenment to all, not just monks or ascetics. It introduced new ideas, compassion as a central virtue, and the Bodhisattva, a being who delays their own final liberation in order to help others awaken. Mahayana Buddhism spread to China, Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. It gave rise to diverse traditions like Zen, with its austere beauty and sudden flashes of insight, and Pure Land, which teaches devotion to celestial Buddhas. Mahayana temples are often grand, filled with statues of many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, each a reflection of the infinite ways wisdom can take form. Then came Vajrayana Buddhism, often called the Diamond Vehicle. It developed in Tibet and the Himalayas, blending Mahayana thought with ancient tantric practices. Vajrayana teachings use rituals, symbols, mantras, and visualizations to cut through illusion quickly and powerfully. Tibetan monks build mandalas from colored sand, only to sweep them away in a gesture of impermanence. They chant in deep, resonant tones, turning prayer wheels and burning juniper. This branch of Buddhism is perhaps the most visually striking, filled with color, sound, and sacred art. Yet its aim remains the same: to awaken from illusion, to realize the mind's true nature. Back in India, another path had long been unfolding, often in silence. Jainism, an ancient Indian religion, teaches that the soul is bound by karma and that only through extreme self-discipline can it be freed. Jain monks wear no possessions, not even clothing in some traditions. They sweep the path before them so as not to harm insects. They eat only what is given at certain times in certain ways. The core principle of Jainism is ahimsa, non-violence. Not just in action, but in thought, in word, in intention. Even lay Jains follow strict vegetarian diets and observe careful ethical codes. Their temples are carved in delicate detail, filled with serene statues of the Tirthankaras, liberated souls who show the way. Jainism is a religion of clarity, of restraint, of radical compassion. And still another tradition rose, not in palaces or forests, but in the fields of Punjab, where farmers toiled and kings passed through. In the 15th century, Sikhism was born. It arose in a time of division between Hindu and Muslim, between caste and privilege. But the Sikh gurus taught a different way. There is one God, beyond form and name. All people are equal. The path to truth is through devotion, honest work, and service to others. The first guru, Nanak, sang poems of unity and justice. The later gurus built communities, composed scriptures, and established a tradition that honors both spirituality and courage. Sikhs wear turbans and carry symbols of their faith. They gather in gurdwaras, where anyone can eat freely in the communal kitchen, rich or poor, believer or guest. Sikhism is a religion of strength in humility, of song in service, of oneness in diversity. Each of these traditions, Hinduism, Vaishnavism, Shaivism, Shaktism, Buddhism in its three forms, Jainism and Sikhism, arose from the soil of South Asia. They share ideas of karma, rebirth, and liberation. They speak of inner transformation, of transcending the ego, of living in harmony with the world. Yet each offers its own path, its own emphasis, its own flavor of the sacred. In Hinduism, one may find the divine in a river, in a statue, in the whisper of a mantra. In Buddhism, one may find it in the breath, in silence, in letting go. In Jainism, it is found in harmlessness, in restraint, in quiet perfection. In Sikhism, it lives in the heart, in action, in the unity of all. These are not religions of conquest or conversion. They do not shout their truths. They unfold slowly, like the opening of a lotus in morning light. They are lived, not proclaimed, practiced, not enforced, whispered in sacred syllables, drawn in lines of ash, sung in temples at dawn. South Asia gave the world not just doctrines, but a way of seeing, a way of being, a path that leads not to victory, but to balance, not to dominance, but to awakening. And in that long journey, from ritual fire to quiet breath, from temple halls to mountain caves, the Dharmic traditions continue, alive, evolving, and forever reaching toward truth. Chapter 5: East Asian Traditions and Folk Faiths. There is a stillness that lives in the mountains of East Asia, a kind of silence that listens rather than speaks. The mist moves slowly through bamboo groves, and temple bells echo across valleys. In these lands, tradition does not arrive with thunder. It comes like morning fog, soft, quiet, unshakable. Here, religion is not always a matter of belief. It is often a way of living, a rhythm of harmony, a search for balance between heaven and earth. And so, the spiritual landscape of East Asia is unlike any other, woven with old wisdom, with ancestral reverence, and with stories older than memory. In ancient China, as rivers carved the land and emperors built walls against the north wind, one man turned away from society and disappeared into the mountains. His name was Laozi, and the path he left behind became Taoism. Taoism, or Taoism, is a tradition that speaks not in commandments, but in paradox. It teaches that the Tao, the way, is beyond words, beyond reason. It flows through all things like water, nourishing without effort, guiding without force. The Tao cannot be grasped, only followed. And those who walk in harmony with it learn the art of wu-wei, non-action, or rather effortless action. Taoists do not strive to conquer nature. They seek to become one with it. Their practices include breathing exercises, meditation, martial arts, and the study of nature's patterns. Taoist temples rise from hillsides, their curved roofs touching the sky, incense curling into the clouds. Inside, statues of immortals stand among symbols of yin and yang, the balance of opposites. For the Taoist, life is a dance, and peace is found not by fighting, but by flowing. Yet, in the cities below those hills, another vision of harmony was forming. Confucianism emerged not from solitude, but from society. It was born in the troubled years of the Zhou dynasty, when order had collapsed and warlords ruled with cruelty. In the midst of this chaos, Confucius taught a way of restoring balance, not through retreat, but through virtue. Confucianism is not a religion in the traditional sense. It has no gods, no temples in the heavens. Instead, it teaches that the sacred is found in relationships, in how a son honors his father, how a ruler serves his people, how a friend speaks with honesty. It holds that society becomes just when each person acts with righteousness, respect, and self-cultivation. Confucian ideals shaped the fabric of East Asian civilization. They defined education, government, family, and ritual. Shrines were built to honor ancestors and teachers. Moral texts were memorized by generations. And though other faiths would rise and fall, Confucianism remained a quiet backbone, holding society together like the roots of an old tree beneath the soil. East of China, across a narrow sea, a different spirit whispered through the forests of Japan. Here, before scrolls were written or emperors reigned, people believed that spirits dwelled in all things, in rocks, in rivers, in wind and fire. This belief became Shinto, the way of the gods. Shinto is a faith of presence. It does not speak of sin or salvation, but of purity, gratitude, and reverence. The kami, spiritual presences, can be found anywhere, in the mountains, in the flowering trees, in the rising sun. Shrines are built to honor them, often marked by red torii gates that stand like doorways between worlds. Shinto rituals are simple yet profound. People bow, clap their hands, offer food or coins. They seek blessing, not absolution. And they do so not alone, but as part of a long line of family, community, and nation. Shinto shaped Japan's seasons, festivals, and imperial history. It is a faith of cycles, of continuity, of belonging. Meanwhile, back in China, as Buddhism traveled east from India, it encountered a culture already steeped in Tao and tradition. What emerged was not a rejection, but a transformation. Chinese folk religion absorbed Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, and blended them with ancient ancestor worship and village customs. It became a tapestry of practices, burning incense for the dead, lighting firecrackers for the new year, consulting fortune tellers before major decisions. People did not feel the need to choose one religion. They prayed to Guanyin for mercy, honored Confucius in education, and respected the Tao in nature. Deities from myth stood alongside historical heroes in temple halls. Dragons and lions danced in the streets. Paper money was burned for ancestors in the afterlife. Chinese folk religion is not fixed. It moves, adapts, evolves. It lives in the gestures of daily life, in the placement of objects in a home, in the rituals of birth and burial. It is a religion of memory, of continuity, of unseen threads binding the living and the dead. In Japan, Buddhism also took root, but again it did not remain as it was. One path it took was Zen. Zen Buddhism emphasizes direct experience. It does not ask for belief in doctrine, but for awareness in this very moment. Zen monks sit in silence, eyes half closed, facing a blank wall. They meditate not to escape, but to see clearly. Zen teaches that enlightenment is not found in heaven, but in everyday life, in a cup of tea, in the sound of a bell, in the act of sweeping a floor. Zen aesthetics value simplicity. A garden with just a few rocks, a scroll with a single brushstroke, poem of only 3 lines. In Zen, less is more. Stillness is action. Words are often useless. What matters is the experience itself. Sharp as snow, fleeting as smoke. Another path of Japanese Buddhism leads to the Pure Land. Pure Land Buddhism teaches that in a distant realm, there exists a Buddha named Amitabha who promises rebirth in a land free from suffering. For those who find the path of meditation too difficult, the Pure Land offers grace. One need only recite his name with sincere devotion. Temples dedicated to Amitabha are peaceful and warm. Devotees chant together, often with beads in their hands. They speak not of struggle, but of trust, not of striving, but of surrender. In this tradition, the heart leads the way, and even the most ordinary soul can find release from the endless cycle of rebirth. Far to the north, on the Korean peninsula, yet another spiritual path evolved. Korean shamanism is one of the oldest religious traditions in East Asia. Predates writing, kings, and even agriculture. It is the realm of the mudong, the shamans, often women, who act as intermediaries between this world and the spirit realm. Korean shamans perform rituals of healing, guidance, and communication with ancestors. They wear colorful garments, play drums and gongs, and enter trance states where they speak with voices not their own. These ceremonies are loud, emotional, and sacred. They help mend the fabric of family, ward off misfortune, and maintain harmony with the unseen. Though often marginalized or banned by formal religions and governments, Korean shamanism has never disappeared. It remains embedded in rural life, in seasonal festivals, in the quiet belief that the dead are not gone, and that every illness has a story behind it. In the vast, windswept plains of Tibet, a different set of stories took root, stories older than even Buddhism itself. Before the arrival of the Buddha's teachings, the people of Tibet practiced a spiritual tradition called Bon. It honored nature spirits, ancestors, and deities who controlled the elements. Bon priests performed elaborate rituals to balance the energies of earth and sky, to protect against disease, and to guide the souls of the dead. When Buddhism entered Tibet, it did not replace Bon. Instead, the two traditions influenced each other. Today, Tibetan Bon resembles Tibetan Buddhism in many ways. Monasteries, monks, scriptures, but it retains its own sacred texts and distinct rituals. Bon sees the world as alive with spirits, both helpful and dangerous. Its practices aim to restore harmony and remove obstacles. In the high mountains, where the air is thin and the stars seem close enough to touch, Bon remains a living thread of Tibet's ancient soul. Yet even beyond these named traditions, East Asia holds countless expressions of animistic belief. Animism is not a religion with scriptures or temples. It is a way of seeing. It holds that all things, trees, stones, animals, rivers, possess a spirit. It teaches that the world is not made of objects, but of relationships. That nothing is truly dead, only silent. That every place has a memory. In forests and fishing villages, people leave offerings for the local spirits. They speak to the mountain before climbing it. They bow to the sea before casting their nets. Animism teaches respect, not out of fear, but out of kinship. The earth is not something to be ruled. It is something to be lived with. These animistic views are preserved not just in rural rituals, but in shamanic traditions found across East Asia. East Asian shamanism blends ancient animism with cultural folklore, medicine, and myth. In Mongolia, shamans ride horses into the steppe, invoking sky gods and ancestral spirits. In parts of China, rituals are performed to drive out misfortune or cure strange illnesses. In Japan, some Shinto practices carry shamanic roots hidden beneath more formalized rites. The shaman is often the healer, the seer, the one who crosses the boundary between the known and the unknown. They are feared, respected, and sought when ordinary remedies fail. Their craft is not learned from books, but from spirits, from dreams, from the land itself. Together, these 10 traditions form the spiritual fabric of East Asia. They are not neatly separated. They blend and bend, coexisting in ways that seem contradictory to outsiders but feel perfectly natural to those within. A person may bow to a Buddhist statue, light incense at a Confucian shrine, and offer a rice cake to a household spirit, all in one day. Religion here is not about choosing sides. It is about living in balance. Balance between order and spontaneity, between society and solitude, between heaven and earth, between life and death. The East Asian spiritual world is quiet, but not empty. It does not scream to be believed. It waits to be experienced, in a cup of tea, in a bowed head, in the way one walks through a forest. And in that quiet, something ancient still stirs, not to command, but to invite. Chapter 6: Folk and Tribal Traditions Around the World. Before temples were raised and sacred texts were written, there were forests, rivers, and fire. There were drums in the distance and chants rising with the morning mist. Across the world, people lived close to the earth, watching the stars, listening to the wind, remembering the names of those who came before them. They did not speak of one god or many gods in the way books would later define, but of spirits, ancestors, and forces that moved through stone and storm alike. This is the world of folk and tribal religions, the quiet pulse beneath history's louder footsteps. In the vast and varied continent of Africa, before borders were drawn and cities grew, communities lived in rhythm with the land. From the Sahel to the Congo Basin, from the highlands of Ethiopia to the southern deserts, each people had their own way of honoring the sacred. These are known collectively as African traditional religions. There is no single founder or scripture. Instead, knowledge is passed from elder to child, from ritual to rhythm. The spiritual world is close, woven into daily life. Ancestors are not gone. They walk among the living, offering guidance, warning, and protection. Nature itself is alive. Mountains, rivers, even trees may be seen as homes for spirits. Ceremonies mark every step of life: birth, marriage, harvest, death. Drums speak, dances tell stories, masks become the faces of gods. Despite the arrival of Christianity and Islam, these traditions endure, sometimes openly, sometimes hidden, sometimes blended into new forms, but always rooted, like baobab trees, deep in the soil of memory. Far across the ocean, in the great plains and deserts of the Americas, another world of sacred practice emerged. Among the Native American peoples, religion was not something set apart. It was part of every act: hunting, planting, healing, dreaming. Each tribe held its own beliefs shaped by the land they called home. Yet common threads run through them all. The land itself is sacred. Mountains may be ancestors. Rivers may carry songs. Animals are not just creatures, they are teachers. The buffalo, the eagle, the coyote, all carry meaning. In visions, a young person might receive a spirit guide or a purpose. Ceremonies mark the cycles of life and the turning of the seasons. Sweat lodges purify. Sacred pipes are smoked in prayer. Dances, sun dances, ghost dances, reach toward the divine. Colonization and forced conversions tried to erase these beliefs, but they were not erased. They went underground, into whispers, into stories, and today they are rising again, carried by new generations who remember that to walk on the earth is to walk on something sacred. On a different continent, in the vast interior of Australia, another tradition rises with the red dust and fades into the setting sun. Among the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, spirituality is woven through the land itself. They speak of the dream time, not a time in the past, but a sacred reality that underlies all things. It is when the ancestors walked the earth, shaping the rivers, carving the hills, placing stars in the sky. But it is also now, always now, ever present. Each clan has its own stories, its own totems, animals or plants that link them to the dreaming. Songlines trace these paths across the desert. To walk a songline is to sing the world into being, step by step. Rituals involve body painting, storytelling, and sacred dances that reenact the acts of creation. Aboriginal spirituality does not separate people from land. Identity is place. Memory is place. And even in the face of displacement, those old lines are still walked, still sung. When enslaved Africans were taken from their homelands and scattered across the Americas, they brought more than wounds and chains. They carried spirits, stories, gods whose names could not be spoken aloud, but who would not be forgotten. In Haiti, these spirits became Loa, and the religion that emerged was Vodou. Vodou is a blending of West African religious systems, Catholic symbolism, and local belief. It honors a supreme creator, but most of daily worship centers on the Loa, powerful spirits who each embody different aspects of life. There is a Loa for love, another for justice, another for healing. People make offerings, light candles, drum and sing. In ceremonies, the Loa may possess a devotee, speaking through them, dancing through them, reminding the community of their presence. Vodou is often misunderstood, feared, stereotyped, but to its practitioners it is not a dark art. It is life. It is connection to ancestors. It is resistance, survival, and sacred power in a world that tried to strip all those things away. In Cuba, another blend of traditions emerged, shaped by Yoruba heritage and colonial imposition. This became Santeria. Santeria merges African orishas with Catholic saints. It was a way to preserve the old gods behind the masks of the new. Each orisha governs a part of nature and a part of the human experience. One may represent storms, another rivers, another the spark of creativity. Practices include divination, drumming, trance, and offerings of food and music. Rituals are joyful, intense, full of rhythm and color. For many Cubans and Cuban-descended communities in the United States, Santeria is more than faith. It is identity, healing, and cultural pride. And farther south in Brazil, the drums still beat for the orishas in the temples of Candomblé. Candomblé shares much with Santeria but evolved within the unique history of Brazil. It draws from Yoruba, Fon, and Bantu traditions, layered with Catholic elements and indigenous Brazilian spirituality. The rituals are elaborate. Practitioners wear white. They dance in circles. They invite the spirits to descend. Each devotee is aligned with a specific orisha, often identified through ritual. Music is central. Drumming patterns summon the divine. Like Vodou and Santeria, Candomblé is often practiced in private, sometimes misunderstood. But behind closed doors, it is sacred theater. It is the heartbeat of Africa echoing in the New World. Beneath all these traditions flows a deeper current, one that predates writing, one that has no name in stone. It is known today by a single word: animism. Animism is not a single religion. It is a way of seeing. It is the belief that everything has spirit: trees, rivers, animals, rocks, even wind. It is found in the Arctic tundra and the Amazon jungle, in Himalayan valleys and Pacific islands. For animists, the world is not made of dead matter. It breathes. It listens. It responds. Rituals may be simple: a whispered word, a carved talisman, a gesture of respect. There is no hierarchy, no central temple, no dogma, but there is deep reverence, a knowing that the world is alive and must be treated with care. And in many of these cultures, there is one figure who knows how to speak to that living world: the shaman. Shamanism is a global tradition, found in Siberia, in Peru, in the Philippines, in Lapland. The shaman is often chosen by vision, by inheritance, or through crisis. Their path is hard. They carry the burdens of the community. They are feared and honored. And while their roles differ across cultures, their work is the same: to maintain balance between the seen and unseen. Even in the modern world, where city lights outshine stars, the call of old paths continues. In Europe, a revival began. People looked back to the forests of their ancestors, to the solstices and stone circles, and began to reconstruct what had been lost. This movement came to be known as Neopaganism. Neopaganism is a collection of modern paths inspired by ancient pre-Christian religions of Europe. Some follow reconstructed pantheons: Greek, Roman, Norse, Celtic. Others blend practices from many sources. At its heart is a reverence for nature, the turning of the seasons, and the divine as both masculine and feminine. Rituals take place outdoors, in groves, on hillsides, in gardens. The moon is watched. The wheel of the year is celebrated: Samhain, Beltane, solstices, and equinoxes. Though new in form, Neopaganism speaks with the voice of old stones and wild rivers. Among these modern paths, two stand out for their structure and following: Wicca and Druidry. Wicca emerged in the mid-20th century, drawing from ceremonial magic, folklore, and the imagined traditions of ancient witchcraft. It honors a god and a goddess, usually as symbolic of the forces of nature. Rituals involve casting circles, invoking the elements, and celebrating the cycles of life. Druidry, inspired by ancient Celtic priests, focuses more on the land, poetry, and cultural heritage. Druids honor trees, ancestors, and the sacredness of place. They gather at ancient sites like Stonehenge, write rituals in the old tongues, and speak of peace and wisdom as guiding lights. Both Wicca and Druidry are diverse in practice. Some are deeply spiritual, others are more cultural, but all carry a longing for connection, to the earth, to history, to something greater than the self. All across the globe, these folk and tribal traditions remind us that religion is not always written down. It is danced, it is sung, it is passed through stories whispered beside a fire, it is drawn in sand, it is buried in the bones of the land. These traditions do not demand conversion. They offer continuity. They do not always seek truth in dogma, but in experience, in feeling, in shared memory. Their gods may not speak in thunder. They may be trees, or birds, or the old woman who knows when to plant by the moon. Even as modern life grows louder, the drumbeat of these old ways continues. In the songs of the elders, in the stories told to children, in the quiet moments before dawn. These are not the religions of empires. They are the faiths of families, of forests, of forgotten names. And yet they endure, because they are not built of stone. They are built of breath. Chapter 7: New and Syncretic Spiritual Movements. In the quiet corners of the modern world, where tradition meets change and the old ways blur into the new, something unusual has been happening. While ancient religions still shape the lives of billions, a new wave of spiritual movements has emerged. Some draw from older paths, weaving together threads of belief into something altogether fresh. Others rise suddenly, born from vision, crisis, or even curiosity about what lies beyond the stars. These are not always the loud faiths. They do not always command great temples or empires. Yet they echo the same questions that humans have always asked. Who are we? Why are we here? What is the meaning of suffering, of joy, of death? And more than anything, how can we find peace? In the heart of southern Vietnam, nestled between rice fields and the Mekong River, a religion was born in the early 20th century that tried to answer all of these questions at once. Taoism, or Chao Dai, began with a vision. A civil servant claimed to receive messages from the spirit world, urging him to gather the truths of all major religions into one unified faith. What followed was a remarkable fusion. Taoism combines elements of Taoism, Confucianism, Buddhism, Christianity, and even Western philosophy. Its temples are vibrant and surreal, blending Eastern architectural styles with European motifs. Inside, statues of Laozi, Buddha, Jesus, and even figures like Victor Hugo stand together in harmony. The religion teaches that all prophets were sent by the same divine source and that humanity is gradually maturing toward spiritual unity. Followers wear white robes, attend elaborate rituals, and meditate upon the divine eye, an ever-watching symbol representing universal wisdom. In this one image, many paths are seen as one. While Taoism looked outward to unify, another movement in Japan looked inward, to joy, to healing, to daily acts of kindness. This was Tenrikyo, a faith founded in the 19th century but which grew rapidly in the 20th. Its founder, a woman named Nakayama Miki, experienced what she described as possession by a divine being. What followed was a mission of compassion. Tenrikyo teaches that the world is the body of God, and that our purpose is to live a joyous life by helping others. There is no sin in the traditional sense. Instead, negative experiences are seen as guidance, messages from the divine urging one to purify their heart and return to joy. The rituals of Tenrikyo are gentle. Worship involves hand movements, musical instruments, and group prayers. The faithful build hospitals, schools, and disaster relief programs, not to earn salvation, but because they believe joy spreads through action. In this way, Tenrikyo became not only a religion but a social force, quietly healing communities through simple, persistent goodness. Not far away, in China during the 1990s, another spiritual path gained millions of followers in a short span of time. Its name was Falun Gong, or Falun Dafa. At first glance, it seemed like another form of Qigong, an ancient Chinese practice of slow movement and breathing for health. But Falun Gong carried something deeper. Its founder taught that the practice was not just for the body, but for the soul. Through exercises, meditation, and moral teachings centered on truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, practitioners believed they could purify their energy and ascend spiritually. Parks across China filled with quiet gatherings at dawn. People stood in silence, their hands forming deliberate shapes, their faces calm. But this growth came with risk. The Chinese government saw Falun Gong as a threat. In 1999, a sweeping crackdown was launched. Public practice was banned. Thousands were detained. And yet, the movement did not die. It moved underground. It spread across the globe. And to this day, in many cities around the world, you can find small groups in public squares, performing their exercises with eyes closed, seeking stillness in a restless world. In another part of Japan, a very different kind of Buddhist revival was taking shape. It was called Soka Gakkai, the Value Creation Society. Founded in the mid-20th century, Soka Gakkai is a lay Buddhist movement with roots in Nichiren Buddhism. which teaches that enlightenment can be achieved by anyone in this life through devotion to the Lotus Sutra. Central to its practice is the chanting of a phrase, Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. Repeated daily, it becomes a rhythm of transformation. Followers gather in community centers rather than temples. They focus on personal development, social engagement, and education. Over time, Soka Gakkai expanded internationally, becoming one of the largest Buddhist organizations in the world. For its members, the chant is not magic. It is a mirror. It is a reminder that within each person lies the potential for wisdom, courage, and compassion. In a time of modern anxiety and disconnection, Soka Gakkai offers a grounded daily path toward meaning. Meanwhile, in the United States, a very different vision of spiritual advancement was taking hold. This was Scientology, created by science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard in the 1950s. Scientology centers on the idea that humans are immortal spiritual beings, called thetans, trapped in a physical world due to trauma from past lives. The religion teaches that through a process called auditing, individuals can recall these past traumas and release their hold. This allows the person to become clear, a state of spiritual freedom and clarity. Scientology emphasizes self-knowledge, mental discipline, and overcoming the barriers that limit potential. It uses a device called an e-meter during sessions, believed to measure mental stress. Despite controversy, legal challenges, and fierce criticism, the Church of Scientology has established centers around the world and continues to attract followers seeking personal mastery and transformation. At the same time that Scientology was taking shape, another spiritual movement was rising, one that brought ancient Indian devotion into the streets of Western cities. This was the Hare Krishna movement, formerly known as the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, or ISKCON. Founded in 1966 by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the movement quickly drew attention for its joyful public chanting, saffron-robed devotees, and free vegetarian feasts. But behind the image was a deeply rooted tradition, Vaishnavism, the worship of the deity Krishna as the supreme personality of God. Hare Krishna followers practice bhakti, or devotional love. They chant the names of Krishna in repetition, live simply, and strive to detach from materialism. Temples became centers of music, philosophy, and service. What began with a small group in New York became a global community. And through the repetition of names, the dancing in city squares, they seek what all seekers long for, connection with the divine. In the 1960s, the idea of spiritual exploration was everywhere. One man, Paul Twitchell, claimed to receive direct teachings from ancient spiritual masters. From those teachings, he founded Iyengar. Iyengar teaches that each soul is on a journey back to the divine source, and that this journey involves many lifetimes. The path is guided by personal spiritual experiences, often described as soul travel, or journeys beyond the body during dreams or meditation. Followers practice a daily mantra and keep a dream journal. They believe that each person can receive direct guidance from divine beings known as Isekai masters. There are no dogmas, no punishments. The emphasis is on exploration, experience, and inner growth. Iyengar does not ask people to abandon their old faiths. It invites them to look within, to listen to dreams, and to walk their own path home. But not all new religions look to gods in traditional forms. Some look to the sky itself. One such movement is realism. In 1974, A French racing driver named Claude Vorilhon claimed to have encountered beings from another planet. These beings, he said, called themselves the Elohim and had created all life on Earth through genetic engineering. According to realism, prophets such as Jesus, Moses, Buddha, and Muhammad were messengers of these extraterrestrial creators. Raelians do not worship these beings as gods. Instead, they celebrate science, sensuality, and universal peace. Their symbol is a combination of the Star of David and a spiral, representing infinity. The religion is small but global, and it has drawn both curiosity and controversy for its views on cloning, sexuality, and technology. Yet, in its own way, realism answers the same longing for purpose, for creation, for connection with something greater than oneself. As the century turned, older traditions were also reborn in modern skin. Modern paganism, sometimes called contemporary paganism, emerged as a revival and reinvention of ancient pre-Christian religions, especially in Europe and North America. This movement includes a wide range of beliefs. Some followers worship Norse gods like Odin and Freya. Others follow Greek, Roman, or Slavic pantheons. Some simply honor the cycles of nature, celebrating solstices and equinoxes, gathering in groves or private homes to mark the wheel of the year. Many practice magic, draw inspiration from folklore, and see the divine as both feminine and masculine. Modern pagans often reconstruct ancient rituals based on archaeological findings, historical texts, and intuition. They are not looking to recreate the past perfectly. They are trying to bring its essence into the present. And finally, from the dusty roads of 19th century Persia came a movement that would help spark a broader revolution in spiritual thought. Before the Bahá'í Faith took form, there was the Bahá'í Faith. Founded by a young man known as the Bab, this religion declared that a new messenger of God would soon appear, ushering in an age of peace and justice. The Bab's teachings spread quickly across Iran but faced brutal opposition. He was executed by firing squad, yet his words lived on. The Bahá'í movement laid the foundation for the Bahá'í Faith, which would soon claim millions of adherents. Though the Bahá'í Faith itself no longer exists as a large independent religion, it remains a powerful reminder that even in oppressive times, visions of unity can take root, that hope, even when silenced, can prepare the way for something greater. All of these movements, strange, beautiful, controversial, or quiet, are part of a broader human story. They reflect the restlessness of the soul, the desire to belong, the search for truth in a fragmented world. Some call for discipline, others for joy. Some promise salvation, others offer healing, but all speak, in some way, of a deeper harmony waiting to be found. Not in the heavens, not in the past, but here, now, in the quiet choice to chant a name, in the silent breath of morning meditation, in the courage to believe that the sacred is still speaking, and that maybe, just maybe, it speaks in many voices. Chapter 8: Spirituality and Universal Values. In the quiet spaces between religion and philosophy, a new kind of spirituality has taken root. It does not always build temples or demand rigid belief. It does not always name its God or write a single scripture. Instead, it listens, it wonders, it searches for something that unites all people: kindness, justice, truth, or simply peace. These are the movements of spirit that whisper rather than command. They speak not of one path, but of many paths meeting in the same clearing. Among these movements, one has stood out for its bold simplicity: the Bahá'í Faith. It began in 19th century Persia, born from the hope that all religions could be seen as one great story. The founder of the Bahá'í Faith taught that the world's prophets, Abraham, Buddha, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, and more, were not rivals, but messengers from the same source. Each brought truth in their own time to their own people. But now the time had come for unity. The Bahá'í Faith teaches that humanity is one family, that religion should not divide, but bring together. There is no clergy, no ritual hierarchy. Baha'is meet in local communities, pray together, and work for causes like gender equality, racial justice, and education. Their temples are open to all, shaped in circles to symbolize unity. Around the world, millions follow this faith, quietly building bridges where others build walls. It is a faith of light, soft but persistent, like dawn breaking through fog. Across the ocean, in North America, another path was forming, one that would invite people of every belief to gather under one roof. This was Unitarian Universalism. It began as a Christian reform movement but soon grew beyond its roots. Unitarians questioned the idea of eternal damnation. They spoke instead of reason, conscience, and the capacity of humans to choose good. Universalists believed that salvation should be for all, not just a chosen few. Eventually, these two merged into one community. Today, Unitarian Universalism welcomes all who seek truth. There is no required creed. A service might include a reading from the Bible, a Buddhist meditation, a poem by a modern thinker. The focus is on ethical living, compassion, and freedom of belief. Members are encouraged to explore their own spirituality while working for justice in the world. It is not the kind of religion that demands obedience. It asks questions. It listens. And it builds sanctuaries not of stone, but of trust. While some sought unity through many voices, others found spiritual expression through a proud reclaiming of identity. In the hills and streets of Jamaica, Rastafarianism was born. It began as a movement of Afro-Caribbean empowerment. At its heart was a belief that Haile Selassie I, the Emperor of Ethiopia, was more than a king. To many Rastafarians, he was the Messiah foretold, a divine figure come to uplift the oppressed. Rastafarianism is more than belief. It is lifestyle. It calls for natural living, rejection of Western materialism, and a deep connection to Africa, seen as the promised land. Dreadlocks symbolize the Lion of Judah. The colors red, gold, and green carry the story of suffering, wealth, and hope. Music became its voice. Through reggae, especially the songs of Bob Marley, the message spread of resistance, of spiritual awakening, of liberation. Rastafarianism remains a living path, one that teaches respect, reflection, and the sacredness of life in every rhythm. Far from the Caribbean, another kind of spiritual connection emerged. Came not from scripture, but from silence. It asked not for faith in the unseen, but for attention to what might still be near. This was the world of spiritualism. In the 19th century, people in the United States and Europe began to claim they could speak with the dead. Mediums held seances in darkened rooms. Tables moved. Voices were heard. Messages from beyond were delivered to grieving families. To many, it was proof that life did not end at death, that souls lingered, that love continued. Spiritualism grew quickly. It was a religion without dogma. Its churches were places of listening and healing. While its popularity faded in parts of the world, it found deep roots in Latin America, where it blended with Catholic traditions and indigenous beliefs. To this day, mediums sit in circles. Hands join, candles burn, and in the hush between words, some believe a whisper from beyond may still be heard. A close cousin to spiritualism is a tradition known as Spiritism or Kardecicism, named after the French educator Allan Kardec. Spiritism teaches that spirits evolve over many lifetimes, that suffering is not punishment, but a chance for learning, that the spirit world is real, organized, and active in guiding human life. In Brazil, where it gained millions of followers, Spiritist centers offer not just messages from the dead, but free clinics, schools, and counseling. Spiritists believe in reincarnation, in personal growth, and in moral responsibility. They hold that the soul chooses its life's challenges for the sake of spiritual progress. It is a belief that brings comfort, especially to those who suffer. For every trial, they say, is a step forward. Beyond these organized movements, a broader current of belief has grown, one that resists labels, that mixes traditions, that moves gently between worlds. This is the realm of modern paganism, sometimes called neopaganism. It is not one religion, but many. Some followers honor ancient gods, Odin, Athena, Cernunnos. Others follow the turning of the seasons, celebrate the solstices, and offer prayers to the earth. Some gather in groves. Some practice alone by candlelight. At its heart, modern paganism is a return to nature, to the cycles of moon and sun, to the idea that divinity is not far away, but all around. It is an echo of forgotten songs, now sung anew. Alongside these revivals, some have turned inward, to the mysteries hidden within older traditions. One of these is Kabbalah, the mystical stream of Jewish thought. Kabbalah seeks to understand the nature of the divine, the creation of the universe, and the soul's journey through it. It teaches that everything is connected through hidden patterns, that the sacred can be found in numbers, letters, and light. Its symbols, like the tree of life, map the journey from the divine source down to the physical world. Once reserved for scholars and mystics, Kabbalah became more widely known in modern times. It influenced not just Judaism, but also parts of New Age spirituality, where seekers adapted its teachings for meditation, healing, and self-discovery. From ancient rituals to new visions, another path has quietly taken shape, a path known as neo-shamanism. It draws inspiration from indigenous shamanic traditions, but adapts them for modern spiritual seekers. Through guided journeys, drumming, breathwork, and visualization, neo-shamans seek to connect with spirit guides, heal trauma, and access deeper wisdom. This is not the shamanism of tribal elders. It is often practiced outside of traditional cultural contexts, and for that reason it walks a delicate line. Critics speak of appropriation. Practitioners speak of healing. What is clear is that in a world of noise, many still seek the drumbeat, the ancient rhythm that opens a door between the seen and unseen. In contrast to all these spiritual paths, another voice rises, one that believes in values but not in gods, that speaks of ethics but not of eternity. This is secular humanism. Secular humanists believe that meaning can be found in reason, compassion, and shared human experience, that morality does not require divine command. that progress, justice, and happiness can be pursued through science, art, and community. They gather not to worship, but to reflect, to discuss philosophy, to celebrate life's milestones without religious ceremony, to volunteer, teach, and advocate for a world grounded in evidence and empathy. Secular humanism is not a religion in the traditional sense, but it answers the same questions: what is good? How should we live? What do we owe one another, with clarity and kindness? And finally, in the midst of all these paths, there are those who say there is no one path at all, only a garden full of many flowers. These are the interfaith movements. Interfaith communities bring together people of different religions, not to debate, but to share, to eat together, to learn from one another, to light candles side by side. These movements include global forums, local dialogues, and even shared worship services. They seek to move beyond tolerance toward understanding. They ask not whose God is true, but how can we live together in peace? Some form intentional communities where Muslims, Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, and others share space, resources, and prayers. Others organize joint humanitarian projects. In these shared acts, a quiet theology takes shape, one that honors difference, but seeks unity in compassion. This is the gentle revolution of spiritual thought. It does not conquer. It does not convert. It invites. It includes. It reflects the changing world. A world where borders blur, ideas flow, and people long not just for answers, but for connection. All these movements, ancient and new, structured and free, speak to a deep truth, that the human heart does not want only to believe. It wants to belong. It wants to heal. It wants to grow. Some find that in sacred texts, others in silent meditation, some in fire and drum, others in science and service. But beneath every belief is a question, and behind every path is a seeker. You may find them lighting a candle, or listening in a circle, or staring at the stars, wondering if something out there is listening back. These are the faiths of the Spirit, not loud, but enduring, not fixed, but alive, not one, but many, and they remind us that while beliefs may differ, the longing is the same: to love, to learn, to live with meaning, together. Chapter 9: Otherworld Faiths and Contexts. There are stories that lie just beneath the surface of what we usually hear. Religions that are not always listed among the great world faiths. Beliefs that slip between the lines, forgotten by textbooks or overshadowed by numbers. But they are there, holding the memories of civilizations, carrying the songs of mountains and forests, whispering through incense smoke and silent mornings. This chapter is about them. We begin with something that often seems familiar, yet holds a complex, layered history. Eastern Orthodoxy. It is one of the oldest branches of Christianity, shaped by the ancient world, and deeply rooted in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Unlike the Western Catholic tradition, Eastern Orthodoxy developed in the Byzantine Empire, centered in Constantinople, where Greek liturgy, icon painting, and mystical theology flourished. After the Great Schism of 1054, the Christian world split. Eastern Orthodoxy remained in the East, growing independently. Russian, Greek, Serbian, and other ethnic churches formed their own patriarchates but remained in communion through shared beliefs and rituals. Worship in Orthodox churches is filled with beauty. Chanting, incense, gilded icons, and processions. Time slows down inside. The divine is approached not through words alone, but through experience, mystery, and reverence. Orthodoxy is not loud. It does not market itself. It moves slowly, like an ancient river. But in places like Ethiopia, Romania, and Georgia, it continues to nourish spiritual life, holding on to ancient traditions passed from hand to hand across centuries. Parallel to it, but distinct, is another ancient Christian tradition.
Oriental Orthodoxy.
This branch includes the Coptic Church of Egypt, the Armenian Apostolic Church, the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, and a few others. These communities split from the broader Christian world even earlier, after disagreements at the Council of Chalcedon in 451. What followed was centuries of endurance. The Copts survived under Islamic rule, building churches beside mosques. The Armenians weathered empires and genocide. Ethiopian Christianity absorbed local customs and ancient Hebrew elements, creating a truly unique expression of faith. Oriental Orthodoxy speaks of resilience, of quiet faith maintained through hardship, of priests walking barefoot into churches carved into rock, of ancient manuscripts, hand-copied, passed down in candlelight. And yet, not all spiritual paths are tied to belief in gods or scriptures. Some begin with a question, a hesitation, a silence. Agnosticism and atheism are not religions in the traditional sense, but they form part of the landscape of belief. Agnostics admit uncertainty. They do not claim to know whether a divine presence exists or not. Instead, they live with the question. They focus on ethics, reason, and curiosity. Atheists go further. They live without belief in gods or the supernatural. For some, this brings a sharp clarity. For others, it invites a deep appreciation of the natural world, of human connection, and of life itself. Today, atheism and agnosticism are rising, especially in Western nations and urban centers around the world. They are often misunderstood not as cold dismissals of faith, but as different ways of seeking truth. For many who leave formal religion, something else arises in its place. Something softer, something more personal. These are the other spiritual paths, the ones not bound to a single prophet or dogma. Often grouped under the label New Age, these paths include crystal healing, meditation, astrology, energy work, and past life exploration. Some follow teachings channeled from spirit guides or extraterrestrial sources. Others draw from Eastern philosophies or indigenous practices. It is easy to dismiss these as fragments, but for many, they form a meaningful spiritual life. These seekers are not looking for absolute truth. They are looking for balance, for harmony, for a quiet moment in a noisy world. Beyond the new, there are also those who guard the old, the local ethnic traditions. High in the Siberian forests, shamans still drum through the night, calling spirits of land and sky. In the Amazon, tribal elders drink sacred brews and sing songs that guide visions. In the islands of Oceania, ancestors are honored through dances, chants, and tattoos that speak of lineage. These traditions are often oral. They pass through story, not scripture. They live in the rhythm of farming seasons, in the movements of animals, in the colors of feathers and beads. Many of these faiths have been pressured, converted, or displaced, yet they persist. They adapt. They survive through revival movements, cultural preservation, and a growing respect for indigenous wisdom. Close to these in spirit, but often found in modern cities, are movements like secular humanism and ethical culture. These are not theistic beliefs. They do not speak of divine judgment or heavenly reward, but they carry a moral vision. Secular humanists believe in the dignity and worth of every person. They champion science, education, and social justice. They gather in communities not to worship, but to reflect, to celebrate, and to serve. Ethical culture began in the 19th century as a non-religious movement focused on moral development. This motto could be lived simply: deed, not creed. In schools, lecture halls, and service projects, these movements keep alive a certain kind of sacredness, the sacredness of human potential. And in many parts of the world, something else has emerged. A quiet blending, a mixing of faiths across centuries. This is religious syncretism. In parts of Africa, Christianity merges with ancestral belief. A saint may also be a forest spirit. A church service may include drumming and offerings. In parts of Southeast Asia, Buddhist rituals are combined with animist ceremonies. In the Caribbean, Catholic saints walk beside African orishas. Syncretism does not argue over dogma. It adapts. It welcomes. It builds bridges between old and new, near and far. Can be unsettling to outsiders, but for those within, it makes sense. It reflects the real lives people live, complex, layered, full of memory. From syncretism, we turn to revival, to people reaching back, past centuries of erasure, to reclaim what was lost. Neo-Thorism and Heat Henry are modern revivals of Norse and Germanic paganism. They seek to honor the old gods Odin, Thor, Freya, and the ancient ways of the North. Through reconstructed rituals, mead blessings, and storytelling, followers try to reconnect with the spirituality of their ancestors. Some groups focus on historical accuracy. Others adapt the symbols to modern life. Some embrace inclusive values. Others wrestle with the shadow of nationalism that sometimes clings to the past. But at its core, this movement is about remembering, about rebuilding something from fragments, about finding meaning in myth. And then there is Sanamahism. In the northeastern corner of India, in the state of Manipur, this indigenous religion has quietly survived. It centers on the worship of Atiya Sadaba, the supreme god, and many other deities connected to nature, community, and moral order. The Métis people, who follow Sanamahism, perform rituals that tie them to their land, their ancestors, and their unique cultural identity. For a long time, this faith was overshadowed by the spread of Hinduism and later Christianity. But in recent decades, Sanamahism has seen a resurgence. Temples are being rebuilt, festivals celebrated again. Young people are learning the language and stories of their ancestors. It is a reminder that even in a crowded world, the sacred can survive in small spaces. And then there are the others, the dozens of smaller faiths scattered across the globe. Some practiced by only a few hundred people. Others carried in exile, passed on in whispers. There are Zoroastrians still tending the flame in Iran and India. There are Mandeans performing river baptisms in Iraq. There are Yazidis praying to Melek Taz in the shadow of persecution. There are Samaritans climbing Mount Gerizim, keeping alive a version of the Torah older than most have read. There are modern movements born in the digital age, virtual churches, online rituals, and global meditation networks that never meet in person. There are people who believe that the earth is sacred, but no God stands above it. There are those who do not call themselves religious, but cry at sunsets, or speak to their dead, or find peace in silence. All of this belief and doubt, revival and reinvention, forms the final layer of the human spiritual map. It does not end with 10 commandments or 4 noble truths. It ends with a question, still unfolding. In a world of 8 billion souls, the ways of seeking are countless. Some walk in ancient footsteps. Some walk barefoot into the unknown. Some chant in temples. Some breathe quietly under trees. And all, in their own way, ask the same things. What is life? What is death? What is love? And how can I live well with whatever time I have? In the end, the religions and worldviews described here are not just systems of belief. They are stories. They are songs. They are reflections of the human attempt to understand the great mystery. Some are loud and proud. Some are barely surviving. Some are forgotten, waiting to be rediscovered. Some are still being born. And every one of them carries a thread that, when woven together, tells the story of us. Chapter 10: Lost Faiths of Early Empires. In the silence of ruined temples and the cracked stones of ancient streets, something lingers. The echoes of forgotten prayers. The dust of gods no longer named. Before the world was carved into nations and textbooks, before today's faiths rose to prominence, there were others. Entire civilizations once flourished under the guidance of beliefs that today survive only in fragments. This chapter is their story. It begins where writing itself began, in the fertile plains between the Tigris and Euphrates. The Sumerians, some of the earliest city builders in human history, believed their world was animated by a vast pantheon of gods. These deities did not exist in distant heavens. They were here, involved in every aspect of life. Enlil stirred the winds, Inanna watched over love and war, and Anu ruled the high heavens. Each city had its own patron god, and towering ziggurats were raised to honor them. From their tops, priests watched the stars and offered sacrifices. These rituals were not merely symbolic. They were thought to uphold the very structure of the cosmos. Kings were not only rulers but intermediaries, charged with pleasing the gods so the rivers would flow and the fields would yield. But the Sumerians could not hold back time. As the centuries passed, their cities crumbled, and new powers like the Babylonians and Assyrians adapted their gods. By the middle of the 2nd millennium BCE, the old Sumerian religion had faded into the background, its language preserved only by scribes, its temples abandoned or repurposed. Further southwest, along the life-giving Nile, another mighty faith endured for thousands of years. Ancient Egyptian religion was immense in scale and complexity. At its heart stood the concept of Ma'at, the divine order of the universe. To maintain it, gods like Ra, Osiris, Isis, and Thoth had to be honored through constant ritual. Pharaohs were more than kings. They were divine beings themselves, sons of Ra, charged with sustaining balance between heaven and earth. Massive temples lined the river. Statues stood with eternal gazes, guardians of divine power. Priests performed daily offerings, while mummification prepared the dead for a life beyond this one. The gods were everywhere, in the sun's daily rise, in the flooding of the Nile, in the flicker of the stars. For over 3,000 years, these beliefs shaped Egyptian identity. And then they vanished. After centuries of foreign rule, first by Persians, then Greeks and Romans, the final blow came with the spread of Christianity. The old temples were closed. The gods were declared idols. And the last hieroglyphs were carved as the doors to the old religion closed for good. Even further east, another mystery still lies buried beneath the sands and floodplains, the religion of the Indus Valley. This Bronze Age civilization stretched across what is now Pakistan and northwest India. Its cities, like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, were planned with extraordinary precision, yet no great temples or royal tombs have been found. The people left no deciphered texts. What remains are artifacts, small figurines, animal seals, and a large communal bath. These hint at a spiritual life centered on fertility, water purification, and possibly proto-deities resembling later gods in Hinduism. There is a figure often called the Great Male God, seated cross-legged with horns, who bears a curious resemblance to Shiva. Another set of symbols suggests the union of masculine and feminine forces. But without written stories, everything is uncertain. The civilization faded around 1300 BCE, likely due to environmental shifts or invasions. Its religion dissolved into time, its gods unnamed, its prayers unheard. Centuries later, across the Mediterranean, a different kind of mythology came alive. Ancient Greece did not separate religion from daily life. It was woven into it. The gods of Olympus were not distant creators but flawed and vibrant characters. Zeus hurled thunderbolts, Athena whispered wisdom, and Dionysus danced between madness and joy. Temples rose in marble cities. Festivals celebrated every season. Oracles spoke in riddles, and heroes sought favor from the gods before embarking on their quests. Each city had its patron deity, each household its sacred hearth. There was no holy book, no required creed, only the expectation that the gods must be respected. Greek religion was not about salvation. It was about harmony between mortals and immortals. But as the Greek world fell to Roman conquest, and as Christianity rose, the old rituals faded. Temples became churches. Myths became literature. The gods of Olympus became characters in stories rather than beings in the sky. Rome, in turn, had its own sacred foundation. The Roman Republic and later the Empire created a state religion that wove divine approval into every level of government. Jupiter ruled the heavens, Mars protected soldiers, and Vesta's eternal flame burned in the heart of the city. Every family had its household spirits. Every war, harvest, and journey began with an offering. The Pontifex Maximus, the chief priest, was a political figure. Emperors declared themselves divine, building temples to their own glory. Rome's religion was adaptable. It absorbed gods from Greece, Egypt, and beyond. It welcomed new cults like Mithras and Isis, but it could not withstand its own transformation. In the 4th century CE, Emperor Constantine embraced Christianity. Soon after, the old rituals were outlawed. Temples were closed or repurposed. And Rome's polytheistic legacy was quietly buried beneath the faith of the cross. Far to the north, where winters were long and stars bright, another pantheon held sway. Norse paganism, practiced by Vikings and their ancestors, was rich with imagery and myth. Gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya dwelled in Asgard, connected to our world by the great tree Yggdrasil. Rituals were held in groves and mead halls. Sacrifices, both animal and symbolic, were made to seek favor or avoid disaster. The Norse believed the world would end in fire and ice, Ragnarok, a final battle from which even the gods could not escape. There was no written scripture, only oral tradition preserved in poems and sagas. As Christianity spread through Scandinavia in the 11th and 12th centuries, the old ways retreated. Some gods became devils. Some festivals were repurposed, and what remained slipped into folklore. In the Western Isles and Highlands of Europe, another spiritual world thrived. The Celtic religion, spread across Gaul, Britain, and Ireland, was animistic and tribal. Sacred rivers, groves, and stones were honored. Gods and goddesses took many forms: Cernunnos the Horned, Epona the Horse Rider, Brigid the Protector. Druids, the spiritual leaders, oversaw rituals, settled disputes, and guided their people through the rhythms of nature. The wheel of the year turned with festivals like Samhain and Beltane, marking life cycles. Roman conquest absorbed and altered many of these beliefs. Later, Christian missionaries brought new doctrines. By the 6th century, most Celtic peoples had converted. The Druids faded into legend, and their sacred sites were replaced by chapels and churches. Across the Atlantic, on a great lake in central Mexico, the Aztec Empire rose with religion at its core. The gods demanded blood. The sun needed sacrifice to rise. Temples were built as stepped pyramids, with flames at the top and altars for offerings. Huitzilopochtli, god of war and sun, led their pantheon. Tlaloc brought rain, and Quetzalcoatl embodied wind and wisdom. Festivals filled the calendar, tying agriculture to cosmic forces. But when Spanish conquistadors arrived, they brought not only steel and disease, but a new faith. Temples were demolished. Priests were executed. Within a generation, the old religion was outlawed, and Catholicism took its place. Further south, in the jungles and highlands of Mesoamerica, the Maya developed a spiritual tradition of astonishing detail. Their gods governed time, crops, death, and rebirth. The calendar itself was sacred, used to align rituals with celestial cycles. Itzamna, Kukulkan, Chuk, and dozens more formed a pantheon tied to astronomy and agriculture. Priests read the stars, interpreted omens, and performed ceremonies involving bloodletting and offerings. Though some Maya cities declined before the Spanish arrived, others thrived until the 16th century. The conquest fractured these societies. Traditional rituals were banned. Churches replaced temples. And once again, a living religion became archaeology. High in the Andes, the Inca Empire worshipped the sun. Inti, the golden god, was the father of emperors. Viracocha had shaped the world. Mountains and rivers were alive, filled with huacas, sacred spirits. The Sapa Inca ruled as both king and divine figure. Temples like Coricancha in Cusco gleamed with gold. Festivals honored the changing seasons. Sacrifices were rare but powerful, meant to preserve harmony between people and nature. Then came Pizarro. The empire fell quickly, and the temples were stripped. Catholic priests burned the idols. In less than a century, an empire's faith was dismantled, and its gods silenced. These 10 religions are only a glimpse. There were many others: the Hittite gods of Anatolia, the Phoenician rites of Carthage, the sacred fires of Persia before Zoroastrianism, the tribal cults of early Japan before Shinto became formalized. Some died slowly over centuries. Others were crushed in conquest. Some were absorbed into new religions. Others disappeared entirely, but none were truly lost. Not completely. Their symbols survive in architecture, in stories, in art. Their rhythms echo in festivals that never fully vanished. And their questions about life, death, the divine are still with us. For all their differences, these ancient faiths share something profound, a sense that the world is more than it seems, that behind the sky, the river, the seed, and the flame, there is meaning, there is mystery, there is something sacred. Even when temples fall and gods are forgotten, the impulse to seek the divine remains. It changes form but not substance. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of these lost religions. They remind us that humanity has always reached toward the unknown, always created rituals to make sense of the world, always found the sacred in the everyday. Long before scripture, long before doctrine, long before now, the sacred was already there, waiting to be named, waiting to be remembered. The Sapa Inca ruled as both king and divine figure. Temples like Coricancha in Cusco gleamed with gold. Festivals honored the changing seasons. Sacrifices were rare but powerful, meant to preserve harmony between people and nature. Then came Pizarro. The empire fell quickly, and the temples were stripped. Catholic priests burned the idols. In less than a century, an empire's faith was dismantled, and its gods silenced. These 10 religions are only a glimpse. There were many others: the Hittite gods of Anatolia, the Phoenician rites of Carthage, the sacred fires of Persia before Zoroastrianism, the tribal cults of early Japan before Shinto became formalized. Some died slowly over centuries. Others were crushed in conquest. Some were absorbed into new religions. Others disappeared entirely, but none were truly lost. Not completely. Their symbols survive in architecture, in stories, in art. Their rhythms echo in festivals that never fully vanished. And their questions about life, death, the divine are still with us. For all their differences, these ancient faiths share something profound, a sense that the world is more than it seems, that behind the sky, the river, the seed, and the flame, there is meaning, there is mystery, there is something sacred. Even when temples fall and gods are forgotten, the impulse to seek the divine remains. It changes form but not substance. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of these lost religions. They remind us that humanity has always reached toward the unknown, always created rituals to make sense of the world, always found the sacred in the everyday. Long before scripture, long before doctrine, long before now, the sacred was already there, waiting to be named, waiting to be remembered.